The wind that moved across the desert outside El Alamein in 1942 carried dust, heat, and the distant rumble of engines. To the men crouched in shallow foxholes along the Allied line, that rumble meant only one thing. Tanks. German tanks. For months the soldiers of the British 8th Army had watched those machines roll across the North African battlefield like unstoppable predators. Long lines of steel advancing through the haze, their guns already firing before most infantrymen could even see them clearly. When a tank approached your position in those days, you did not fight it. You survived it if you were lucky. You waited for artillery, for aircraft, or for your own armor to arrive. And if none of those came in time, you prayed. The Second World War had turned tanks into kings of the battlefield. Since 1939, the German army had proven again and again that armored columns moving fast, supported by aircraft and mechanized infantry, could smash through entire countries in weeks. Poland collapsed in a month. France in 6 weeks. Yugoslavia in 11 days. The formula seemed unstoppable. Steel moved faster than men, and men had very little that could hurt steel. Every army in the world understood the problem. Anti-tank guns existed, but they were heavy. A 37mm gun might stop a light tank, but it required a crew, a vehicle to tow it, ammunition crates, and time to set up. By the time the gun was in position, the tank might already be somewhere else. Infantry needed something lighter, something they could carry themselves, something that could follow them into forests, towns, hills, and trenches. But for years that solution seemed impossible. Tanks were simply too strong. Their armor grew thicker every year. A rifle bullet bounced off. Machine gun fire did nothing. Even large-caliber anti-tank rifles barely worked anymore as armor improved. Infantrymen faced the most dangerous machines on Earth with weapons that might as well have been toys. Yet while armies searched for complicated solutions, bigger guns, stronger rifles, heavier explosives, the answer to the problem was quietly forming in laboratories and workshops across several countries. The key was a discovery made decades earlier but rarely used in practice. A strange property of explosives called the shaped charge. The idea seemed almost magical when first demonstrated. Instead of blasting outward in every direction, an explosive could be shaped so that its force focused into a narrow jet capable of burning through thick steel armor. The power was enormous. A small warhead no bigger than a soup can could punch through armor many times its own thickness. But there was still a problem. You had the warhead. You had the destructive power. What you did not have was a simple way to deliver it. Throwing it by hand meant getting dangerously close to a tank. Attaching it as a mine required stealth and courage bordering on madness. Launching it from a rifle produced too much recoil. Engineers tried spring devices, mortars, and complicated launchers. Most were heavy or unreliable. Then in 1942, halfway across the world from the deserts of North Africa, 2 American engineers working with the U.S. Army Ordnance Department began experimenting with something that seemed almost embarrassingly simple. They took a steel tube. The tube itself looked unimpressive. It was about 5 feet long, just wide enough to hold a rocket-propelled grenade. One end rested on the soldier's shoulder. The other pointed toward the target. When the trigger was pressed, an electric current ignited the rocket motor, sending the grenade forward in a flash of smoke. Because the rocket provided its own propulsion, the launcher produced almost no recoil. That meant a soldier could fire it from his shoulder like a rifle. The shaped charge in the warhead would do the rest. When the weapon was first demonstrated to American officers, many were skeptical. It looked too simple. Too crude. But when the rocket struck the armor of a test vehicle and burned straight through, the skepticism vanished. Someone joked that the long tube resembled the homemade musical instrument played by radio comedian Bob Burns. That instrument was called a bazooka. The name stuck. At first, the bazooka was little more than an experiment. Early models were awkward and unreliable. Batteries sometimes failed. Rockets misfired. Training manuals had to be written from scratch because no weapon like it had ever existed before. Yet the idea was powerful enough that production began almost immediately. By the end of 1940, 2,000 of launchers had been built. They were cheap, simple, and easy to manufacture. Factories that produced metal tubing and electrical components could build them without difficulty. The real test, however, would come only in combat. That test arrived in North Africa. When American troops landed during Operation Torch in November 1942, many of them carried bazookas that they had barely trained with. Some soldiers had never fired one before stepping onto African soil. In the chaos of the early fighting, the weapon's performance was uneven. Rockets malfunctioned. Teams struggled to coordinate under fire. Then the Germans arrived. German panzer divisions that had spent years fighting across Europe and the Soviet Union now turned their attention toward the newly arrived American forces. The experience was brutal. Battles like Kasserine Pass revealed how unprepared the Americans were. German armor smashed through defensive lines with alarming speed. But something interesting happened during those early clashes. In a few scattered engagements, bazooka teams managed to hit German tanks. The results were shocking. A weapon carried by 2 infantrymen had just destroyed one of the most expensive machines on the battlefield. It did not happen often at first. The bazooka required skill and nerve. A gunner had to let the tank approach within 100 yards or less before firing. But when the rocket struck correctly, the armor failed. German officers began paying attention. During one engagement in Tunisia, German troops overran an American position and discovered several bazookas among the captured equipment. Engineers quickly sent them back to Germany for analysis. Within weeks, German scientists had dismantled the launcher, studied its design, and recognized its potential. The result was their own version, the Raketen Panzerbuchs, soon known as the Panzerschreck. The German model was larger and more powerful, firing an 88mm rocket capable of penetrating thicker armor than the American version. It looked terrifying, and its name, Tank Terror, reflected that reputation. But despite its power, the Panzerschreck had drawbacks. Its rocket produced a fierce backblast that forced the gunner to wear protective equipment. The launcher was heavier and more cumbersome. It required more materials and more time to produce. Meanwhile, American factories continued building bazookas by the thousands. The weapon improved quickly. New rockets became more reliable. Training programs taught soldiers how to ambush tanks effectively. Teams learned to aim for vulnerable areas, side armor, rear engine compartments, turret rings. By the time the Allies invaded Sicily in 1943, the bazooka had become something entirely different from the crude experiment of the previous year. It had become a real battlefield weapon. Sicily introduced the bazooka to a new environment. Narrow roads, stone villages, steep hillsides where tanks could not maneuver easily. In these places, infantry held the advantage, and bazooka teams used that advantage with increasing confidence. German tank commanders noticed something disturbing. Towns that once could be rushed quickly now had to be approached cautiously. Any building might hide a bazooka team. Any alley might contain a soldier waiting with a rocket already loaded. The psychological impact began to spread. For the first time since the start of the war, tank crews felt vulnerable to ordinary infantry. The change became even clearer in Italy. There the war turned into a grinding struggle through mountains, forests, and ancient towns where heavy armor often struggled to move at all. Bazookas proved useful not only against tanks, but against bunkers, machine gun nests, and fortified houses. Soldiers discovered that the rocket's explosive power could blow holes through walls, allowing them to move through buildings instead of streets. They could destroy defensive positions that previously required artillery. A weapon designed to fight tanks had become a versatile battlefield tool. German doctrine adapted. Tanks began operating more cautiously, always accompanied by infantry to protect them from close-range attacks. Every building had to be checked, every hedge examined, every possible hiding place considered dangerous. The speed that once defined German armored warfare began to slow. Then came Normandy. On June 6, 1944, tens of thousands of Allied soldiers stormed the beaches of northern France. Among their equipment were thousands of improved bazookas, including new models with better sights and ignition systems. Beyond the beaches lay the bocage, Normandy's dense hedgerow countryside. Fields were divided by thick earthen walls covered with roots and vegetation. Tanks struggled to cross them. Visibility was limited. Every corner was a potential ambush site. It was perfect terrain for bazooka teams. German tanks advancing through the hedgerows could rarely see more than one field ahead. Infantry carrying bazookas could hide behind embankments, in barns, or inside shattered farmhouses. When a tank exposed its side or rear, a rocket could strike with devastating effect. Reports from American divisions during the summer of 1944 show that bazookas accounted for a significant portion of destroyed German armored vehicles. But even more important was the effect on behavior. Tank crews hesitated. Advances slowed. What had once been rapid armored thrusts now required careful coordination with infantry. Each village became a slow and dangerous fight. By late 1944, the bazooka was everywhere in the Allied armies. Every infantry battalion had multiple launchers. Every company trained teams to use them. Millions of rockets flowed from American factories. And then came the winter of 1944. The Ardennes forest in Belgium was silent beneath snow and fog when German forces launched their last great offensive of the war. Hundreds of tanks pushed through the forest in a surprise attack that became known as the Battle of the Bulge. Many American units caught in the opening hours were inexperienced or exhausted. Some were overwhelmed. Others fought desperately to slow the German advance. In those frozen woods, the bazooka faced perhaps its toughest test. Cold weather caused batteries to fail and rocket propellant to burn unpredictably. Soldiers wrapped spare batteries in their jackets to keep them warm. They waited in foxholes as tanks approached through the snow. When the moment came, bazooka gunners often fired from distances so close they could hear the tank engines clearly. 30 yards. Sometimes less. Many of those rockets struck their targets. In village streets and forest clearings, bazooka teams knocked out German armor that otherwise might have broken through American defenses entirely. The fighting was chaotic and brutal, but again and again small groups of infantry managed to stop machines that had once dominated battlefields. By the end of the war, the bazooka had proven something extraordinary. A weapon that cost roughly $25 to produce could destroy a tank worth tens of thousands. It was not perfect. It required courage to use. Many gunners died before they could fire. But the equation was impossible for armored forces to ignore. Cheap, portable anti-tank weapons had changed the battlefield forever. After the war, military planners everywhere studied the lessons carefully. New generations of rocket launchers appeared in armies across the world. The Soviet RPG series, the American Law and At-4, the Swedish Carl Gustaf, all trace their lineage back to that simple steel tube developed during World War II. Even tank design evolved in response. Armor became thicker, shaped differently, supported by reactive plates and active defenses. Yet the fundamental idea remained. Somewhere on a battlefield, hidden behind rubble or vegetation, an infantry soldier might be waiting with a rocket launcher on his shoulder. And if he aimed well enough, even the most powerful armored vehicle could become nothing more than a burning wreck. That was the revolution the bazooka created. It did not win the war alone. No single weapon ever does. But it changed the balance between man and machine. It gave ordinary soldiers the ability to challenge one of the most powerful weapons ever built. A simple tube, a rocket, a moment of courage. Sometimes that was enough.